Advisor Jake Sullivan too met with Barnier in Tel Aviv for 2 hours and discussed the efforts to resume talks on the release of hostages this week.
Thursday, the president will travel to New Delhi, India to attend the G20 Leaders Summit.
Now, the death of 3 Israeli hostages at the hands of Israeli defense forces has surely sparked concerns. It raises questions over the safety of the remaining hostages amid Israel's continued offensive. Over 100 hostages are still held in captivity in Gaza. On Thursday, Israel revised the number of hostages alive in Gaza to 115. As per the reported figures, 132 hostages are with Hamas, but not all are alive. Hamas also holds the remains of 20 dead hostages. Israel has categorically denied to scale down the onslaught, this even as it is facing an increasing pressure from friends and foes alike to make sure no civilians are harmed. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan wrapped up his West Asia tour on Friday after meeting with Israeli and Palestinian leaders. During the meeting with Netanyahu, Sullivan stressed the need of transitioning to lower intensity operations in the near future. He said it is not appropriate for Israel to occupy Gaza in the long term and discussed a timetable for winding down the intense phase of the war. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant had stated it will take months to destroy Hamas, and there is no fixed timeline yet. Sullivan also met Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Abbas told Sullivan that Gaza is an integral part of the state of Palestine, and that separation or any attempt to isolate any part of it is unacceptable. Sullivan reiterated that two-state solution would ultimately lead to a long-lasting path, a prospect that Israeli officials have contended. Israel's next stages of the war are under the radar now more than ever. Dr. Adam Day is head of the Geneva office of the United Nations University Center for Policy Research. He's now joining us live from Geneva, Switzerland. Doctor, great to have you on the show. Welcome to WION The World as one.
Thanks so much, Eric. It's great to be on your show.
Doctor, Israel is getting a lot of flack both from within and around the world after soldiers admitted to have mistakenly killed hostages in Gaza. Some may not see it now, but how damaging could this action be on the part of Israel in this war?
I think it's an incredibly important moment, Eric, and I think it points to the enormous pressure that's growing on Israel domestically and internationally and on the U.S. And it's one of many tragedies that are unfolding in Gaza, including the killing of 8,000 Palestinian children. And I think you see that language coming in President Biden's comments about indiscriminate bombing. You mentioned Jake Sullivan's trip, too. I think part of that trip was really about how to shift Israel's approach in this military operation. You hear about more precise ways of targeting Hamas leadership. You see this trying to push for a less intense version of this military operation. I think one of the challenges, though, is as the pressure grows on both Israel and the U.S. to shift gears, there isn't a clear next step where you see an alignment growing out of Jake Sullivan's trip to Israel in terms of timeline, in terms of intensity, or in terms of how they're going to respond to this pressure.
Doctor, we'll talk about Jake Sullivan's visit in a short while, but this incident has raised doubts and even worries about hostage safety. Again, with the soldiers admitting that some may have escaped from captivity, how can the safety of the remaining hostages be ensured, if at all?
Well, I think the very short answer is it can't. And as long as the hostages remain in custody, as long as this remains a hot conflict, I think there's no way to guarantee their safety. And that's one of the problems. The solution would be another pause. I know that there are negotiations happening behind the scenes to try to get that pause, which did succeed in mid-November in getting hostages released. I don't think there's a scenario where a military operation can free all of those hostages safely. I think all sides understand that. And so really the answer comes in some form of either a pause or a ceasefire. That's the best way to guarantee their safety. I don't think there are any other options right now in the short term.
All right, let's talk about Jake Sullivan now, who is the U.S. National Security Advisor. He was in Israel and urged the government to lower the intensity of military campaign in Gaza. What do you read from his statement? Some say the U.S. could be giving hints that the issue of Palestine will stay. Is that the case?
I think it was very clear that for the U.S. position, that the question of Palestine, you hear Jake speaking about a two-state solution, even though you see pressure back from the Israeli government really on using the language of a two-state solution. You see some even very senior members of the Israeli government saying that Oslo may have been a mistake. I think this points to a real rift in the narrative that we haven't seen it so clearly before, where I think the U.S. position, the UN position remains aligned with some form of a two-state solution, but I think that that's a very unpopular sentiment right now. And within Israel, I think that may have shifted now to more public statements saying that that isn't something that they can consider now. And it may be a short-term issue where you hear the president of Israel saying we need time to grieve and please don't use this language. In the short term, it may be that the two-state solution, the issue of Palestine, can come back onto the table. But right now, it's a very worrying moment where the narratives of the U.S. and Israel are quite different. And I don't see an immediate bridge back into a clear common narrative or vision for what the day after Gaza will look like. And that's really the most important question in the longer term, which is how do you create a process that will get us from a hot military operation to a political process and a Palestinian process too, to decide leadership and how to move forward.
Doctor, let's talk about the confrontation in Israel's border in the north. The IDF is dropping leaflets in South Lebanon. Do you foresee or think Israel is preparing to expand the war?
Well, when I used to look much more closely, and when I lived in Lebanon, we would look at scenarios for potential escalation. And certainly this scenario is very, very high on the list of likely escalation scenarios, where the intensity of conflict within Israel can create a spillover. My sense is if there was an escalation across the border into the north, it would be an unintentional one. I don't think that Hezbollah has the intention of bringing the conflict directly into Israel. I don't think Israel wants to have 2 or 3 fronts going when so much of their resources are focused on Gaza. So I think right now they're doing those leaflets, they're doing those activities on the border largely to try to dissuade further action. I don't see the intention of either Israel or Hezbollah or other actors, including Iran, to escalate there. That doesn't mean it won't happen. And 2006 should be clearly in our minds as a miscalculation. And the possibility of unintentional escalation is very real. You have 100,000 rockets north of the border, strategic weapons north of the border, and really a very high risk that something could happen without the intention of either side for that escalation.
Dr. Adam, finally, and please make it brief, we've seen various resolutions being vetoed or passed in the United Nations Security Council. Many say that they've lost hope in the United Nations. What do you make of that statement, that the world has lost faith in the United Nations and they think that the United Nations will not bring peace in Israel and Gaza?
Well, certainly the United Nations by itself won't bring peace. I think the vote this week with 153 member states in support of a ceasefire shows that the international consensus is there. I also think it's worth noting that the UN is already in Gaza. There are a lot of resources there, and I think that it offers something to build on. There are no good outcomes, no good scenarios, no silver bullets, but I do think some combination of the UN plus Arab neighbors plus potentially some other actors coming together to find a transition plan is probably the only of several bad options. And so the loss of confidence is, I think, mainly a loss of confidence in Israel and the U.S. and the Palestinian leadership to find a solution. And I think that puts greater emphasis on the UN stepping in a more leadership role. And I think you see the SG in triggering Article 99 saying it's now time to really put this at the top of the international agenda.
All right, I've been talking to Dr. Adam Day, who is the head of the Geneva office of the United Nations University Center for Policy Research. Dr. Adam, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thank you, Eric.
Just turn and begin with the latest from Gaza. Now, 2 months ago, when war broke out, when Israel attacked Gaza, that I have to go on repeating this, that after one of the most brutal terrorist attacks that we've seen in a long time, a terror attack carried out by Hamas. But when Israel started to move in, it seemed to be getting a lot of support from countries like the United States, for example. US President Joe Biden rushed to the war zone. He made his support for Netanyahu and for Israel crystal clear. Cut to this week, Biden has issued a warning to Bibi. He said Netanyahu needed to change. Plus, Netanyahu is losing international support more and more. With the continuing bombardment and the civilian casualties that we are seeing, the votes, for example, at the United Nations are continuing to turn against Israel. Is this going to make a difference? And how is Israel going to react? Here's a quick report.
אנחנו נחושים יותר מתמיד להמשיך להילחם עד לחיסול החמאס, עד לניצחון המוחלט.
We're not going to characterize every airstrike. We're not going to speak for Israeli military operations.
It is not easy to destroy them. It will take and require a long period of time.
Is Netanyahu's war plan costing him friends? Earlier this week, US President Joe Biden criticized what he called Israel's indiscriminate bombing of Gaza. Biden said Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu has to change, and this government in Israel is making it very difficult for him to move.
I make no bones about it. I've had my differences with some Israeli leadership. I've known Bibi for now 51 years. He has a picture on his desk of he and I when he was a young member of the Israeli service here, foreign service. And I was a 32-year-old senator. And I wrote on the top of it, Bibi, I love you, but I don't agree with the damn thing you had to say. It's about the same today. I love him. But look.
Biden was speaking at a fundraiser in Washington. So far, the US president has been steadfast in his support of Israel. He flew down to Israel days after the war broke out. He assured military and diplomatic support to Netanyahu. But things have drastically changed in the last 2 months. There is growing pressure on the Biden administration to do more to limit the civilian casualty in Gaza. Over 18,000 Palestinians have died so far. At least 50,000 others are injured. 2 million people have fled their homes. That's over 85% of the population. Today, Gaza is a humanitarian catastrophe. On the 12th of December, Biden also warned Bibi that Israel is losing international support. How did Israel respond? Israel Foreign Minister Eli Cohen said, "The war will continue with or without international support." On the 14th of December, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met Benjamin Netanyahu. Following the meeting, Bibi said Israel would continue the war against Hamas till absolute victory. In the United Nations General Assembly this week, 153 countries voted in favor of a ceasefire. Among them was India.
Women and children are paying their lives.
So is there now mounting pressure on Israel to actually end the war, find some sort of a ceasefire? We've now been joined by Jacob Olidot, who's the Director of Research at GINSA, has given the Center for Defense and Strategy. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a sort of a difficult week for Israel, that vote in the United Nations, and then it seems to be some sort of pressure that do things differently. Things can't carry on the way they are. What do you make of what's happening?
Thank you so much, Vikram, for having me on your program. You're right. It's been a very difficult week. This has been the most intense fighting that Israel has faced. The focus on casualties is a very natural one. I mean, but and in as much as any one casualty, one civilian casualty is a tragedy, it doesn't tell. It only tells a partial picture. And so I think we need to put this into the context of Israel taking, as the White House spokesperson said, John Kirby, unprecedented precautions to try to mitigate harm to civilians on the one hand. And on the other hand, you have Hamas, which uses civilians as human shields with its terrorist infrastructure underground, under hospitals and schools. And so I think that is kind of the context in which you see the operation proceeding.
Jacob, I was just curious, what are Israel's friends actually telling it right now? Because there are two aspects to this. It's not that easy to decapitate terror groups in an urban setting like we have in Gaza. I mean, the Americans have seen it in places like Iraq, others have seen it in Syria. It's not as easy as it sounds to actually go in and crush Hamas. And number two is, of course, the question of even if you are to do it, there's a vacuum there in Gaza, which somebody has to try and fill. So what are Israel's friends telling it? What should be the next steps? Is there a good option here for Israel?
There are still over 100 in Hamas captivity. They're not only Israelis, but there's still Americans there. Their families just met with President Biden yesterday. There are other nationalities as well. So it's a highly fraught operation. Most of Hamas operatives are underground, in a 300+ mile tunnel maze to evade detection, to hide their weapons. So it is complicated. I think Israel's friends are doing two things. I mean, first, providing it the diplomatic support on the world stage. And I think you're seeing throughout the region and in the United States measures to prevent the conflict from escalating or broadening across the region. You've seen in the last couple of weeks, for example, a number of Gulf states prevent a kind of more maximalist reaction among certain Arab countries that would have, basically taken the form like the 73 embargo. That obviously did not happen because Israel's friends are working quietly to make sure that at least this is contained and Israel can do what it needs to do.
So would you think that there are chances of a humanitarian ceasefire or a cessation of hostilities for a while, or is it unlikely?
I think, so Israel has been on a regular, maybe even daily basis, implementing a humanitarian pause of several hours to allow assistance to come in. It should be noted that these pauses actually prolong the war because they allow Hamas to regroup, to collect themselves and plan their attack. So that alone, actually, it's worth considering that actually is a factor that exacerbates the civilian humanitarian toll.
All right, Jacob, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Vikram.
We begin with our top focus right now. Saudi Foreign Minister has said that he's concerned about the potential for escalation in the Red Sea region. And the statement came on Friday as attacks from the Houthi-controlled Yemen struck two flagged ships, which were Liberian, and in the Bab al-Mandab Strait. And this is as per the U.S. military.
Of course, we are concerned about the potential for escalation. Our region is very complex, and we do not need any other conflicts to erupt, and therefore we hope that we will be able to avoid any further escalations in our region.
Earlier, shipping giant Maersk had announced their decision to suspend all container shipments through the Red Sea, and the German transport company Hapag-Lloyd has also suspended its Red Sea container ship traffic. Now, Maersk, which is one of the world's largest shipping companies, also decided to send the vessels on a detour around Africa, and this was confirmed by a spokesperson for the company. The Danish firm's vessel, which was traveling from Salalah in Oman to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, was targeted by the missile near the Bab al-Mandab Strait and linking the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Now, the company said that it was making the move after a near miss involving its Maersk ship. Now, the company confirmed that the crew and the vessel were safe. The recent series of attacks come after Yemen's Houthi rebels vowed to target vessels in the Red Sea and in an attempt to put pressure on Israel to stop bombing the Gaza Strip. On the other hand, German transport company Hapag-Lloyd has said that it was halting Red Sea container ship traffic until December 18th and after the Houthis attacked one of its vessels. It was en route from the Greek port to Singapore and there was no casualty, and the ship is now traveling on towards its destination. These incidents have raised fears in the global supply chains, which could be severely disrupted. And if the attacks continue in the narrow, busy waterway, at least 3 container ships have been attacked or disrupted near Yemen in the past day or before. Maersk Houthis militants said that they attacked the MSC Alanya and MSC Palatium 3 cargo container ships with naval missiles. And Houthi spokesperson also said that the ships were targeted after they refused to respond to warnings from Yemeni naval forces. Now further, apart from discussing the idea of a naval coalition with allies, the US is also focusing on reducing Houthis' threat in the Red Sea. And the US envoy for Yemen said that Washington wants to form the broadest possible maritime coalition to protect ships in the Red Sea and send an important signal to the Houthis that further attacks will not be tolerated. Now, even though the United States believes that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is helping to plan and carry out the Houthi missile and drone attacks, Iran has denied any involvement.
گروه‌های مقاومت در منطقه نمایندگان کشورها و ملت‌های خود هستند. بر اساس منافع خود و کشورها و ملت‌های خودشون تصمیم میگیرند، بررسی میکنند، به صورت خودجوش و اقدام میکنند. بنابراین این گونه اظهارات در چارچوب فرافکنی است و برای فرار از شرایط بغرنجی است که رژیم صهیونیستی با اون مواجه است.
The Houthis are involved in the Israel-Hamas conflict and now they have further expanded their actions. They have been attacking vessels in vital shipping lanes and launching drones and missiles at Israel from over 1,000 miles away in Yemen's capital. Now, earlier they had even cleared their intentions to target all the ships heading to Israel, regardless of their nationalities.
And mounting anger at the Israeli government have spilled onto the streets of Tel Aviv. This comes after the Israeli Defense Forces mistakenly killed 3 Israeli hostages in Gaza, misidentifying them as threats. And this has triggered massive demonstrations against Netanyahu for not doing enough to free captives held by Hamas. The hostages were believed to be either abandoned or escaped Hamas captivity. Well, all the hostages have now been identified as males, and they were in their mid and late 20s. The Israeli Defense Forces have revealed that the hostages emerged shirtless and were holding a white flag to signify surrender. Demonstrations started on Friday night outside the country's military headquarters. They held signs which had images of the hostages' faces and messages such as, "Get them out of hell." The demonstrators lambasted Netanyahu for his inaction on securing a new prisoner exchange deal. Take a listen.
My reaction, first of all, was grief. These are families that I know personally and people that have been waiting so hopefully for their loved ones to return. And to me, it struck me in the heart, showing me that there's got to be a deal right now to bring them back, and that we have to do more things to help these people get out of this prison.
Well, this incident occurred while U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was visiting the region. Moreover, U.S. President Joe Biden has also labeled Israel's bombing of Gaza indiscriminate. Well, U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby called the hostages' deaths heartbreaking. However, he cautioned against making broader judgments about Israel's ability to conduct its campaign. Our top focus now on right now. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has promised to keep up the military pressure on Hamas, despite appeals from relatives of hostages held in Gaza for a return to negotiations after friendly fire killed 3 captives. Take a listen to exactly what Netanyahu said.
We are in a war for our existence in which we must continue until victory. Despite the international pressure and despite the unbearable cost that the war is exacting from us and our fallen sons and daughters.
The Israeli army revealed that the 3 hostages were carrying a white flag and cried for help in Hebrew when they were mistakenly fired on by the Israeli troops. The news of their killings sparked demonstrations in Israel, with the relatives of the remaining hostages expressing concern that their loved ones could be next. A funeral was later held for the hostages mistakenly killed by the Israeli army. Meanwhile, the Israeli army said that it had discovered weapons and arrested around 80 Hamas members in military activity at a hospital in Gaza. Hamas has described it as a horrific massacre. Israeli tanks and forces withdrew from a hospital in northern Gaza, leaving behind chaotic scenes as distressed civilians who say that they have nowhere to go. They were searching for bodies under the rubble. On the other hand, the armed wing of the Palestinian militant group Hamas released a video that it said shows their brigade fighters attacking an Israeli forces base in Juhur al-Dik in the Gaza Strip. According to a statement released with the video, Hamas said that it killed an Israeli soldier in the base and seized his M16 weapon as well. In the West Bank, 3 Palestinians, including a teenager, were killed by the Israeli gunfire in separate incidents on Saturday. And this is according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin departed on a multi-day trip to West Asia. Austin will be joined by the top U.S. General Charles Q. Brown for meetings in Israel in the coming few days. And as Israel's offensive continues in Gaza, the cost of war is increasing, and that in terms of lives being lost, families being destroyed, and an entire generation of children suffering endlessly as the war continues. Out of 18,800 people killed in Gaza so far, 70% of them have been women and children. The reality for children in Gaza has turned grim. From searching for toys and food through rubble, they continue to live under terror of impending death.
واحنا نايمين في نص الليل اجت طائرات قصفت المكان. هنا صار زلزال في المنطقة، مش معروف ايش صار. طلع كيف الدمار، حجم الدمار هنا، بيوت كتير راحت. يعني طلع كيف هناك ايش ذنبهم الناس احنا ايش ذنبنا في دورنا يصير فينا هيك.
Children in southern Gaza could be seen looking for their belongings through rubble after an Israeli strike damaged their home severely. The young boy says that home held nice memories, and this is a story that has become far too common in Gaza. Amid rubble, dust and destruction, the Gazans continue to search for hope.
هذا البيت كان وينا كان ذكرياتنا هنا كل شيء هنا إلنا حاجاتنا الحلوة هنا بسكليتات كل شيء أواعي كل شيء إلنا هنا يعني كنا ننام ونشرب وناكل هنا فجأة كل شيء تدمر فيش شيء في المكان ضايل زي ما أنت بتشوف ولا حاجة ضايلة ولا حجر على التاني.
Shelling has continued across northern and southern Gaza despite the international leaders calling for a ceasefire. Israel says it will not stop until they have destroyed Hamas. The top officials say that the war could last several months. So the question remains, for how long will the innocent children continue to pay the price of a collective punishment inflicted by Israel? And what future could Gaza's children possibly have left?
Israel's military is facing a fresh scrutiny from its citizens. Its offensive on Gaza has not just killed thousands of Palestinians, but also its own people who were taken hostage. Our next report tells you more on this.
Israel's ongoing military offensive in Gaza has taken a turn for the worse. In one of its latest operations, the IDF is mistakenly said to have killed 3 Israeli hostages.
אני מבקש לעדכן את הציבור בבשורה קשה וכואבת על אירוע שהתרחש מוקדם יותר היום. במהלך הקרבות בסג'איה, כוח צה"ל זיהה בשוגג 3 ישראלים חטופים כאיום. כתוצאה מכך, הכוח ירה לעברם והם נהרגו.
3 young Israeli hostages became sitting ducks to the barrage of attacks in Gaza. A budding musician, a young motorcyclist, and an avid basketball fan, all at the receiving end of the brutal cost of war. The initial Israeli Defense Forces probe shows that the hostages were shirtless, waving white flags when soldiers opened fire. Something like this must have unfolded. These images released by IDF said to show the dozens of men surrendering near hospitals in northern Gaza. Remember, the rule of surrender in international humanitarian law states that opposing forces cannot directly target surrendered persons. Israel's military is now facing renewed backlash from its own citizens. And once again, the spotlight is back on the Israeli government's apathy toward its hostages.
I would say that he is responsible for everything that is happening, that happened, and is still happening. He has blood, a lot of blood on his hands, and he should resign now. And let people that are responsible and care for this country, unlike him, to take over and get this war over with and get all the kidnapped people back home now.
Hamas had previously released 140 hostages from captivity during the week-long swap. But families of the remaining 100 hostages still await news on their loved ones and pray for their return.
אני מירב סבירסקי, אחות של איתי, שחטוף בעזה כבר 70 ימים. אנחנו אחרי ערב מזעזע ואני מתה מפחד. אנחנו דורשים עסקה עכשיו.
In the aftermath of what Israeli military calls a mistake, global and domestic pressure on Israel has once again increased to bring a hostage deal back to the table, and soon.
Israel continues to pound the Gaza Strip with increased intensity. The ongoing military offensive continues to flatten southern Gaza. Over 90% of Gaza's 2.3 million civilians stand displaced. Here is the latest from the ground. The Israeli military released video footage of its operations in the Gaza Strip. Operations were conducted across Gaza City and Jabalia, which houses the enclave's largest refugee camp. Palestinian Health Ministry has said that close to 19,000 Gazans have been killed so far. Israeli tanks and warplanes intensified their bombing of the Gaza Strip. The IDF is focusing on the southern cities of Khan Yunis and Rafah. On the same day, the Israeli military also said that it had attacked a Hamas command post in the Gaza Strip. Airstrikes were also carried out on targets near the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. Meanwhile, Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades had launched at least 6 rockets to Jerusalem. 3 rockets were intercepted by their Iron Dome air defense system. Lorries with aid were seen driving from the Rafah border into the Gaza Strip. This comes as the U.S. continues to push Israel to allow more aid into Gaza. Israel has also said that it would open a second entry point to speed up deliveries. Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan al-Saud has said that he is concerned about the potential for escalation in the Red Sea region. The statement came on Friday as attacks from Houthi-controlled Yemen struck 2 Liberian-flagged ships in the Bab al-Mandab Strait, as per the U.S. military.
Also, we are concerned about the potential for escalation. Our region is very complex, and we do not need any other conflicts to erupt, and therefore we hope that we will be able to avoid any further escalations in our region.
Earlier, shipping giant Maersk had announced their decision to suspend all container shipments through the Red Sea. German transport company Hapag-Lloyd has also suspended its Red Sea container ship traffic. Maersk, which is one of the world's largest shipping companies, also decided to send the vessels on a detour around Africa. This was confirmed by a spokesperson for the company. Now, the Danish firm's vessel, which was traveling from Salalah in Oman to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, was targeted by a missile near the Bab al-Mandab Strait, linking the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The company said it was making the move after a near miss involving its Maersk Gibraltar ship. However, the company confirmed that the crew and vessel were safe. The recent series of attacks come after Yemen's Houthi rebels vowed to target vessels in the Red Sea in an attempt to put pressure on Israel to stop bombing the Gaza Strip. On the other hand, German transport company Hapag-Lloyd said that it was halting Red Sea container ship traffic until the 18th of December, after the Houthis attacked one of its vessels. It was en route from the Greek port of Piraeus to Singapore. There were no casualties, and the ship is now traveling on towards its destination. These incidents have raised fears in the global supply chains, which could be severely disrupted if the attacks continue in the narrow, busy waterway. At least 3 container ships have been attacked or disrupted near Yemen in the past day or so. Before Maersk Gibraltar, Houthi militants said that they attacked the MSC Elena and the MSC Platinum and this cargo container ship with naval missiles. The Houthi spokesperson said that the ships were targeted after they refused to respond to the warnings from the Yemeni naval forces. Now, further, apart from discussing the idea of a naval coalition with allies, the U.S. is focusing on reducing the Houthi threat in the Red Sea. The U.S. envoy for Yemen said that Washington wants to form the broadest possible maritime coalition to protect ships in the Red Sea and to send an important signal to the Houthis that further attacks will not be tolerated. Even though the United States believes that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is helping to plan and carry out the Houthi missile and drone attacks, Iran has denied any involvement.
گروه‌های مقاومت در منطقه نمایندگان کشورها و ملت‌های خود هستند. بر اساس منافع خود و کشورها و ملت‌های خودشون تصمیم میگیرند، بررسی میکنند، به صورت خودجوش و اقدام میکنند. بنابراین این گونه اظهارات در چارچوب فرافکنی است و برای فرار از شرایط بغرنجی است که رژیم صهیونیستی با اون مواجه است.
The Houthis are involved in the Israel-Hamas conflict, and now they have further expanded their actions. They have been attacking vessels in vital shipping lanes and launching drones and missiles at Israel from over 1,000 miles away in Yemen's capital, Sana'a. Earlier, they had even cleared their intentions to target all the ships heading to Israel, regardless of their nationalities.
Well, for more details on this story, we are joined live by Helet Barrel, who is the former director of the Israeli National Security Council. Thank you so much for joining us, Helet. Well, you are joining us from Tel Aviv, so you are in the thick of things there. Now, if you could just tell us, do you think this is going to affect Israel's offensive there? Do you think they will be able to carry on the operation and secure security and amid the hostages killings here?
Well, there's no doubt that the incidence of the hostage killing is a tremendous tragedy for us here, especially because the main reason why those soldiers are fighting so fiercely in such difficult conditions and have been for very long, as they express themselves, is to bring back hostages. So this is definitely a very tragic situation. Having said that, I don't think this will put an end to the campaign. There are two main goals to this campaign. The first is to return our hostages. The second is to eradicate or extremely degrade Hamas's ability to fight and completely to govern the Gaza Strip. And both of those need to be achieved one way or another. So while there's no real deal on the table to return the hostages in any other way but fighting, certainly I don't see this campaign receding. And we'll have to see if there are any other developments. But there will be a stronger push here within Israel to try and initiate something to return the hostages, which already has been on way, but now with the terrible incident, it obviously will grow stronger.
Right. You do speak of the campaign not changing at all, but do you think that the IDF will, however, change its strategy in its war against Hamas?
Yeah, no, I don't think the campaign is not going to change at all. I think certainly the only way to win such a campaign is to keep changing it and adjusting the way you fight to the goals. So I think there are various ways that I'm not going to elaborate in which this campaign can change face and be more intense and less intense and address it from various facets of warfare. And we've seen that Israel knows how to stop the campaign for a ceasefire that allows the exit of the hostages and then continuing out with the same force, which I think also Sinwar wasn't banking on. So I do think it will have to be dynamic in the form of war. We're already seeing it because down south in Khan Yunis, there's a very different kind of warfare than was taken up north in Gaza City. So we're already seeing different kind of fighting. This is why you're seeing also more casualties on the Israeli side of the time, because this is now a more precise and careful form. These areas are more populated, and so obviously the campaign changes all the time.
Helet, you do know that the pressure is mounting on Israel to ease the civilian impact, but do you think enough is being done in that department? We know that the death toll keeps rising. Is the collective punishment as we're seeing, is it justified?
We're not seeing collective punishment. What we are seeing is Israel defending its vital national security interests. Here's a piece of advice. Don't come into our homes, butcher our babies, burn entire families, gang rape women, and then you wouldn't be in this situation to begin with. And I say this because we have also seen a devastating poll by Khalil Shkaki, who's the leading pollist in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, that shows 95% of the Palestinians who answered this poll in the West Bank claim there were no crimes, no war crimes conducted on October 7th. 81% of them are happy with the leadership of Yahya Sinwar. So this is not about retribution. This is about security. As a person who lives in Israel, who was born in Israel, I would not take the chance of having this ever happen again. And so Israel is defending its security. Now, it is very tragic, the kind of casualties that we are seeing on that side. One of the main reasons is that Hamas is intentionally endangering citizens, which is what it's always done. Civilians, they're not even citizens. They don't have any rights under Hamas. And it's working for them. Hamas feels that if Palestinians die, innocents die, then they have won. And if Israel stops, then they have won. So they feel for them it's a win-win situation. So this is the kind of conflict that we are engaged in. And yes, there will be mounting pressure, but I think as long as we stand stern with the United States, the United Kingdoms, and other like-minded countries who understand what terrorism is and what the right to survive is, then we will achieve these goals. On the other hand, I am absolutely supportive of increasing the humanitarian aid entering, and we have opened another crossing from Israel, Kerem Shalom, and I think on that level, we have to do more and more. Mind you, we're not alone in that. So does Egypt, so does the world.
Right. Helen, but we are talking about Israel right now on the show. But do you think that enough is being done to restrain the civilian casualties?
I think whatever can be done is being done to restrain civilian casualties. I don't think it's ever going to be clean and surgical. It never has been in any war. It wasn't in Iraq. It wasn't in Afghanistan. It wasn't in any war. But some wars need to be fought. And again, once you put down the equation and you set it up and you come into our homes and you burn our families alive, there are going to be consequences. You know, I have been interviewing for this channel and many other outlets in India and elsewhere, and I have said from October 8th, this won't be more of the same. Israel went out of Gaza 15 years ago, had contained its response on every attack against us. We have been living here in Tel Aviv, let alone in the south, under missiles and rockets for 15 years. And on October 7th, a line was crossed. And now this is the response. And I don't think that someone can say you don't have the right to defend yourself. With 95% of Palestinians in the West Bank, not even Gaza, thinking that October 7th was a good idea, this is where we're at.
Okay. Halit, now Israel has vowed to free all the hostages and eliminate Hamas, but there have been 2 months on. You think, in your appreciation, how successful has this strategy been?
Well, I can't call the strategy successful until the hostages are back. We have 135 hostages still held in Gaza, so I don't consider that to be a success. Every day is a danger to their lives. So certainly I would have wished and wanted it to be a far quicker situation. And I hope that there's going to be more success. And we're hearing about new negotiations in Qatar, and Egypt is obviously playing a very constructive role. So hopefully something will move ahead in that sense. In terms of the war fighting, I think it's going along as pretty much as was expected. You mentioned in your comments that Israel had paid a heavy price, and this is very true for us. Every soldier is somebody's son. You know, we have obligatory service. I have a daughter in the military right now. So for us, every one of these losses is an entire world, an entire family. And so it is a very heavy price. But here's the bottom line. We are willing to pay it. They are willing to pay it. So this campaign is a slower campaign than some have expected. But this is what happens when you let 15 years of military buildup and a complete underground metro happen, and you don't address it in time, and you take too much of a lenient overview of the situation, you end up with a very, very sticky situation, especially because Israel is trying so hard to minimize those civilian casualties, which makes it longer and harder. And we're paying a price in soldiers and in blood for taking a more slow approach and trying to be more precise.
Thank you so much, Helen Beryl, for speaking so passionately about this particular issue.
Thank you.
And mounting anger at the Israeli government have spilled onto the streets of Tel Aviv. This comes after the Israeli Defense Forces mistakenly killed 3 Israeli hostages in Gaza, misidentifying them as threats. This has triggered massive demonstrations against Netanyahu for not doing enough to free the captives held by Hamas. Now, the hostages were believed to be either abandoned or escaped the Hamas captivity. All the hostages have been identified as males, and they were in the mid and late 20s. The IDF revealed that the hostages emerged shirtless and were holding a white flag to signify surrender. And demonstrations started on Friday night outside the country's military headquarters. They held signs with images of the hostages' face and messages such as "Get them out of hell." The demonstrators lambasted Netanyahu for his inaction on securing a new prisoner exchange deal.
My reaction, first of all, was grief. These are families that I know personally and people that have been waiting so hopefully for their loved ones to return. And to me, it struck me in the heart, showing me that there's got to be a deal right now to bring them back, and that we have to do more things to help these people get out of this prison.
The incident occurred while U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was visiting the region. Moreover, U.S. President Joe Biden has also labeled Israel's bombing of Gaza indiscriminate. U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby called the hostages' deaths heartbreaking. However, he cautioned against making broader judgments about Israel's ability to conduct its campaign in the future.
We certainly recognize the series.
And for more on this, we are now being joined by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. He's a military expert and senior fellow for defense priorities. He's also the host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, Colonel Davis.
Thanks for having me.
Right, I want to first start by getting your insights on how precarious is the hostage situation right now, because Netanyahu, in his first televised address after killing the 3 hostages, has clearly said that Israel will dismantle Hamas and the war will continue.
Yeah, he's very clear about the continued movement towards the culmination of the war. But just days prior to this tragedy, the Israeli government said that they're not even talking to Hamas. They actually withdrew their chief negotiator, said there would be no more hostage discussions, which was taking a lot of criticism from some of the family members of those hostages. And then immediately following this situation here, I think that pressure got really even higher. And then you saw the immediate return of the negotiations. And now then they're talking about it again. And I just can't imagine that Israel wouldn't have the highest priority of getting those hostages back, even above making tactical progress for the time being. Because the truth is, Hamas is not going anywhere. Israel can take the time. They don't need to rush this. They need to get those hostages back.
I was just coming to that, Colonel Davis, on the mounting pressure on Netanyahu in Israel regarding an immediate hostage release deal. Can we now expect a change in Israel's strategy because as of now, Netanyahu has clearly said that it wants to eliminate Hamas and bring back the hostages both. But with the current situation at hand, can we expect Israel's strategy to change?
Well, I mean, they're going to have to. They don't have any choice. They have to respond to this dynamic and very changing situation. And look, I mean, there's a two-way street here. So it's not just Israel saying they're going to get the hostages back. They've got to give something to get something. And the Hamas side is definitely in the driver's seat here because they possess them so that they can, try to extract high, some kind of high price for them. But I also would imagine that they would try to drag this out for a while. I would imagine they would give some here and then some more here and then maybe another couple of weeks. I think that anything they can do to try to drag this out, to try to get more pauses is what they're going to end up doing. But I don't think that strategically in the long term it's going to make any difference, but I do expect that it will take a long time.
Right, Colonel Davis, following on the point you made there that you have to give something to get something right now, how possibly can a deal be struck at the moment? Because like you said, that Hamas is on the driver's seat, and Hamas has clearly said that there will be no hostage release until Israel accepts the militant group's conditions for an exchange, while Netanyahu has clearly been adamant on not conceding to such demands.
Well, I mean, I think that's just part of the negotiating process. I mean, they made similar claims before the first one, and you see that they ended up relenting on that. I think it's like so many negotiations, you come in with a high demand and a high ask so that you can, give away to get what you actually wanted. And what the Hamas side actually wants is they want some of their prisoners released, and then they also want to buy some time. So I think it's in their motive. Their benefit to continue to do this, because if they stay staunch and don't even give anything back at all and don't make any deals, well, then Israel's going to say, okay, we tried, and then they're going to continue on with the heavy bombardment. So I imagine that you'll see Hamas give in some of this, and there will probably be another round or two of hostages in the near future.
Right, Colonel Davis, the Mossad chief also met with the Qatari Prime Minister, and Netanyahu in his address also hinted at negotiations coming underway. Are you optimistic regarding a ceasefire in the future?
Well, if it's up to Israel, there won't be a ceasefire, period. They are adamant and just passionate even about having no ceasefire. They want to maintain the military pressure, and they don't want to relent anything on Hamas. But the pressure on Israel is also mounting, and it's getting higher and higher. I mean, I think in your segment there before we came on, you're talking about how there was protests even in Israel itself, many of which calling for Netanyahu's removal. And of course, in Europe, there's lots more. You see European heads of state increasingly asking for those. And you're talking major allies like Britain and Germany and France, I believe. I'm sorry, France and Germany. And many in the United States are also asking. So the pressure is going up for Netanyahu to have some kind of ceasefire so that the innocent Palestinian civilians can at least take a breather and get some more aid in there, and to save their lives. And a lot of people just want the war to be over. And as long as Israel won't even agree to a ceasefire, then there's really not much of a prospect for that.
Right, Colonel Davis, my last question to you. We spoke about the domestic pressure on Netanyahu, and like you mentioned, there's also growing international pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister. My question to you is that what role is the U.S. playing in all of this? Keeping in mind that Sullivan was in the region a few days ago, and now U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has also left for West Asia.
Yeah, the U.S. government is on a balancing act because they're trying to continue to give support to Israel. They're trying to give support to our European allies, even our Asian allies, who all have competing interests and desires in this matter. And you see there is a significant growing appetite in Europe among our most staunch allies for a ceasefire. So the United States can't be opposed to that, and also for Israel without taking some heat from one or both sides. So it's a tough situation. But I ultimately think that the U.S. is going to come down and probably agree with more of the European allies that some kind of ceasefire is in order here and something that's necessary. Otherwise, the killing of this innocent Palestinians is going to continue to go up, and then Israel could actually lose Western support. And that's much more valuable than any kind of temporary ceasefire.
Right, Colonel Davis, thanks very much for taking our time and joining us here on WION. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
The war in the Gaza Strip continues. Israel has continued with its campaign of pounding the Gaza Strip with increased intensity in its bombings. Now, the ongoing military offensive has flattened large parts of not just northern Gaza, but also now southern Gaza. 90% of all residents in the Gaza Strip, that is a population of about 2.3 million people, have been uprooted from their homes. And here's the latest in terms of what is unfolding at this moment on the ground. The Israeli military has released a video footage of its operations in the Gaza Strip, where operations are being conducted across Gaza City and also in the Jabalia refugee camp, which houses the enclave's largest refugee camp. The Palestinian Health Ministry has said that nearly about 19,000 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have been killed in this campaign of relentless bombing by the Israelis. Now, Israeli tanks and warplanes have intensified their campaign of bombing the Gaza Strip. The IDF is now focusing on the southern cities of Khan Yunis and Rafah. On the same day, the Israeli military has also said that it has attacked a Hamas command post in the Gaza Strip. The airstrikes were carried out on targets near the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. Meanwhile, Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades have launched at least about 6 rockets into Israel. 3 rockets were intercepted by the Iron Dome. The lorries with some aid were seen driving in from the Rafah border crossing into the Gaza Strip, and this comes as the United States continues to push Israel to allow for more aid